You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 357 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It's going well, Jeremy. Beautiful night.
Beautiful night. The Cubs have been fun. We've got a lot of baseball to talk about. We've got news. The Cubs are making a playoff push. Potentially, we'll discuss a little bit more with our guest this week, longtime friend of the show. You know her from her work over at Bleed Cubby Blue. She's got a weekly fantasy baseball podcast, and of course, many appearances here on this program. Sara Sanchez, thanks for coming on to talk Cubs with us tonight.
Yeah, always a pleasure. And I think you're just maybe more optimistic about where the Cubs are at right now than I am, but that's okay.
I went on Twitter and and this is all my timeline right now. Everybody's excited. This is the playoff push. Are the Cubs a wild card team? We'll start there, and then we'll get to the week that was, and we'll talk about the week that will be. But first, let's get it out of the way right now. Sara, for you, are the Cubs a playoff team at this point? Now that they are, at the time of this recording, they had just lost to Cleveland. Still under 500, but we're feeling good.
Are we though? Like, they won a couple of games against the White Sox, and that was pretty cool. The way they just lost to Cleveland was excruciating on multiple levels, the errors and the home runs, and a shout out to Beth Mowins, who is maybe the greatest play-by-play person that the Cubs has on TV regularly. Obviously, 100%. Pat Hughes is like sacrosanct, but like doing the first Noel and the second Noel, as Joanski Noel hits 2 home runs, not one, but 2 home runs off Shota tonight. I mean, the Cubs are looking interesting. I think they were 3.5 games out of a wild card spot entering tonight, and they also have a 7.2% chance of being in the playoffs, according to Fangraphs, and that's up. That's not including tonight's loss. That's from their, 2-game sweep of the White Sox. So, I don't know. I think this is still a 500 baseball team that Jed Hoyer has built on hopes and dreams and bubblegum.
500 baseball team, if we're lucky. Pat, 4 teams still ahead of the Cubs for that last wild card spot. Again, what did not exist a couple years ago as a playoff spot, and still 4 teams to get leapfrogged over to get a playoff spot.
That's right. I think one thing that's happened that I think people may not necessarily be focused on as much is that, we look at how many games the Cubs are out of the last wild card spot, right? 3.5 games out of the last spot. One of the things that people have not paid probably as much attention to is, what about the first and second wild card slots, right? Because in theory, right, if this were some game theory project, you've got 3 wild card slots. So if a team were to collapse and they were all kind of bunched together, maybe the third team still makes it, but you pass another team above them. That's always possible. Unfortunately, right now, the top 2 teams in the wild card in the National League, the Padres and the Diamondbacks, have been on fire. They're doing better than the Cubs have. Like, the Cubs go 8-2, they'll go the Cubs will go 8-3, they'll go 9-2. They're really good. So they're actually building out a lead at the top, and they're going to beat us in the if there's ever everyone beats us in a tiebreaker. That's sort of the general rule of thumb, which is its own issue, right? So it really does kind of narrow your options if you're like, wow, those seem really hard to get. So now we really are talking about that third slot. And right now, I don't think we'd even be talking about the Cubs in a wild card capacity, but for the complete collapse of the Atlanta Braves. Now, I'm a little bit sympathetic because as much as we talk about our own injuries, it'd be as if, losing Strider in the first game and Acuna early in the year, they'd be like the Cubs losing like Justin Steele on opening day and he never comes back the rest of the year. And losing Acuna would be like the Cubs losing like Happ, Suzuki, and Bush, all three of them, right? You know, I mean, it's just he's that good. And then Ozzy Albies is out, so I mean, they've really suffered. Max Fried was hurt, now he's back, but so they're kind of a walking wounded. I do think that we're seeing them kind of at their nadir right now. I do think that they will bounce back a little. I don't see them continuing to collapse perennially, forever. And so the Cubs have made up like 4 games on them in the last week. I don't know if that's going to continue, so that's a concern. And then you've also got the Mets and the Giants and the Cardinals. All have one thing in common: they all earn the tiebreaker over the Cubs, as do the Braves. So basically everybody. So yeah, it's going to be challenging. It's not just like being 3.5 games out. It's really like having to basically play better than 4 other teams. If any one of those teams above you is as equally hot as you, or even a little bit less equally hot as you lose, right? So you got to really do well. And so that's the question is, can the Cubs do that? And look, there's like 42 games left this year. There's still like a quarter of the season. So yeah, anything's possible. Are we basing it on what we've seen in the first 120 games, or are we basing it on the hypothetical of, well, what if we do something we haven't done so far this year and play really well the rest of the year, right? And I think there are a couple aspects to that. I'll give you one positive and one negative, and then I'll shut up. The positive is, I think as the Cubs have played better lately, the thing that I've noticed, and I think everybody's noticed, is that the Cubs lineup itself feels like it's been lengthened. Having Paredes at third, and as opposed to say a Madrigal or a Mastroboni or Wisdom, is probably an upgrade. But even more importantly, when you look at the bottom of the order, Pete Armstrong and Miguel Amaya were hitting like middle relief pitchers basically, for most of the season, with OPSs around 500 or lower, and now they're actually playing pretty well, like even like solidly. And I think that makes a big difference, because the thing has been hurting the Cubs all year is if either have an injury or somebody goes cold. Suzuki goes cold, Happ goes cold. The batting order just couldn't survive because there just were too many automatic outs in the order. And now you're seeing a lineup with Bellinger back and hot, and you've got Suzuki, you've got Happ, you've got Bush, and now you've got Armstrong and Amaya also doing well. And Swanson has gotten a couple hits. You're starting to see a situation where somebody can be cold. Like Ian Happ hasn't exactly been on fire until the last 2 days or so. Hasn't really been on fire this month. Even Suzuki had a rough week, to start August. But it doesn't matter if you've got like 5 other guys backing you up in the lineup. So on the plus side, there's hope there that they can continue this improvement on offense. A lot of it's also tied to home runs, something that they were pretty weak on most of the year. If they can continue that helps. Now, on the flip side, and this is the negative part, I am deeply concerned with the state of the Cubs closer situation, because we've just learned recently that the Cubs closer to start the season is now going to undergo Tommy John surgery. So Alzolay's out. Ben Brown, although not ruled out for the season, is not going to be throwing the baseball due to an injury that requires rest. And last I checked, it's the middle of August. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say we're probably not going to expect a whole lot from Ben Brown the rest of the year. So it's like, is this Hector Neris or bust? Is that where we're at? Because if it is, I don't know if my heart can take it, man. I mean, the White Sox series was quintessential. Like Neris, like I can't believe they didn't lose that first game. Frankly, I was pretty sure they were going to. And so that's a lot to ask of your bullpen and of your closer to do something they haven't done all year, which is, in this case for Neris, be effective as a closer, which was never really, I guess, theoretically his role to begin with. But so there are some pros and cons there. I'll let you two discuss and see what you think.
Well, Sarah, that's so we heard a lot of positives, a lot of negatives here. What are your thoughts on some of the things that Pat brought up here about the injuries, about the back end of this bullpen, and what are some of your concerns in addition to those things?
Well, so let me just, Pat is absolutely right that Hector Neris is not a closer. Like, go look at the walk numbers and the strikeout numbers and compare them and get back to me. Like, there's a reason they call him Heart Attack Hector. He has earned that nickname in the Cubs bullpen, and that's where we are right now, people. The guy who comes in the ninth, who is standing between the Cubs and a 2 or 3 run victory, is Heart Attack Hector. That's where Cubs fans are at. The thing I want to go back to for a second, though, I think Pat made an excellent point about the playoff odds. And I mentioned that sort of Fangraphs number of 7 point whatever percent earlier. I want to put this in context for a second. All of those teams that are above the Cubs in fighting it out for that third wild card spot, these are their make the playoffs numbers. The Braves have a 62.5% chance to make the playoffs. The Mets have a 28.7% chance to make the playoffs. The Cardinals have an 11.4% chance to make the playoffs. The Giants have a 16.9% chance to make the playoffs. The Cubs are far and away the least likely team of that group to make the playoffs. And so I think as you're looking at the group of teams that they have to surpass in order to get to where they are trying to go, I'm not saying there's no chance. I mean, there's a better, math is math, and 7 point whatever is a real chance to do the thing. It's not nothing, but it's also relatively small, especially against the competition. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not sure they have the depth to pull off what they're trying to do. This strikes me as a team right now, and I think this game against the Guardians to open the series in Cleveland is a perfect example. They have no margin for error. If they make an error, any error, whether it's a pitch that just didn't hit its spot or whether it's a literal error, they lose. Because against any team of quality, any team that has a real shot at being in the playoffs this season, they don't have that margin. And this is why, as I've been listening to the discourse for the last few weeks around the Cubs, especially after the White Sox fired their manager, Pedro Grifol, and people are like, well, Craig Counsell's on the hot seat. He is not, because Craig Counsell did not do this. This team was constructed on purpose and brought back to run it back by Jed Hoyer. Jed Hoyer owns this team. This is what he did. He did it twice on purpose. Both times it looks like it's going to fall short. It kind of looks like the first iteration was the slightly better one. And the guy I want to know if he's on the hot seat is Jed Hoyer.
That's a great point. And we've talked about it at length that we think that either we were curious to see. I think the trade deadline was very telling that Jed's not on the hot seat because they let him do things at the trade deadline, where if he's actually on the hot seat, you take away the keys and you say, no, here's the list of guys you can trade. Christopher Morel's probably not on that list. It's probably the Drew Smileys and the Hector Neris's, and these are the guys you're trying to find a home for. When we see
guys
him,
they kept.
Yeah, all the guys they kept, and we see him make a move for a big swing for a guy like Isaac Paredes. That's completely not a guy on the way out.
I have a question for both of y'all, and I'm not trying to put you on the hot seat, so if you don't want to answer, I totally understand. But the videos of Jed Hoyer talking about trading Christopher Morel and how pained he looked, like sitting in a room by himself, like with a blank wall behind him after he releases this statement that doesn't name Christopher Morel or Hunter Biggie to thank them for their time with the Cubs. All of that struck me as dude who's just got caught in a moment that he knows he messed up on. That nobody wants to back him. Nobody else is out there defending this. He got into a call with the Rays and decided to try to save his own skin and did something really ridiculous. And I've never seen president of baseball operation interviews like that. I've never seen a statement like that doesn't thank a fan favorite player for his time on the team. It was truly wild. And I think at some point in the next 2 years, Jed Hoyer is no longer going to be the president of baseball operations for the Chicago 100%. Cubs because he has clearly proven he can't do this thing. And we're going to look back on those interviews and that statement and just be like, this was it. This was the moment that we all knew something weird was going on.
Anytime you're involved in a trade with the Rays, I always feel like you're going to lose that trade. And as soon as Hunter Biggie...
As soon as we saw they'd made a trade with the Rays, our first thought was, oh no, What did we do?
Who's
Not
the
even knowing who the
other
players were.
person? Yes, yeah. Who's the throw in here that's gonna just really let us down? And it was a Hunter Biggie that balanced out that trade. And it was like, oh, he's gonna be really good, and it's gonna be one of those things where, it's gonna be a tough one, and Jed won't be here to yell at. I think when that happens, he'll be gone, like you mentioned, Sarah. I don't think he's long for the job, but I think he'll be here for. He'll get at least a couple more years probably out of this if the expectations are, if they sneak into a third wild card, does that keep his job next year?
Not for me, but I find this whole like we're gonna be mediocre and pretend that we're gonna like play the middle and hope. Like, what was it the Mariners? Jerry DiPoto said like we're aiming for 53% every year or whatever crazy number he put out there. Like, we are the Chicago Cubs. Tickets at that ballpark cost a lot of money.
The most money,
as the three of us know, sadly.
Yes.
It is the most expensive fan experience in baseball, but they have consultants over there, so nothing costs the most. Everything costs the second most, and then it adds up to the highest tally ever. I am over this nonsense where Jed's like, I wish I was the Rays. Go work for the Rays then. Please, for the love of God, learn how to put together a baseball team from somebody who actually knows how to do it, because you can't.
Well, it's also his boss who would be the one to fire him, Tom Ricketts, who learned all the wrong lessons from last year's World Series, and Pat, anytime he says he wants to be the Diamondbacks or points to the Diamondbacks as an example of something, it makes me really nervous.
I want to be the Phillies. Go out and sign the dudes who are fun and cost money, and then be the best team in baseball and laugh all the way to the bank like Dave Dombrowski.
I'd like to be the Dodgers, where you literally get all the best players, and then you also develop good players in your farm system. You defer
the money.
Yeah.
Like we owe $3 billion to players in 2037.
So the joke on you two is going to be when all is revealed, and it turns out that actually it's been all along Carter Hawkins who's been pulling the strings behind the scenes as general manager, and Jed is just a puppet. So there you go. It's frustrating, and we knew coming into this season that the Cubs are cutting it close, and watching all the young pitchers who had so much promise, the Cade Hortons and the Ben Browns, even Hayden Wisniewski and others, and Jordan Wicks and these types, all kind of go down with these injuries that seemed like they're going to eat up their much of the year for these guys, is really kind of depressing, because that to me, I think we're going to go into this off season, no matter what we do the rest of this year, still not knowing what we have in that respect, because we're going to have a lot of unknowns from guys who A, may or may not be healthy, and B, we don't really know what they can do at the major league level. And that's frustrating. Like I see the idea of trying to find some pieces to this. And I guess, barring a major course shift, it's going to be Bush at first and Isak at third, and that's the way they're going to go. But it doesn't leave you a whole lot of options for improving the lineup, right? You got catcher maybe, and then depending on what Bellinger does, you might have a outfield or DH spot. But I just look at the same team coming back next year, a year older, and I don't know if you get anything better if you just keep doing the same thing over and over again. I'm not sure if that's maybe you get lucky one year, but what does lucky mean? Does that mean 87 wins and then you lose in the second round of the playoffs if everything goes perfectly well? I don't know. I like the idea of building a team that's going to win 95 games. Remember when the Cubs won 95 games and missed the playoffs, and we're all bummed out and said, we suck. That's terrible. We should. Well, wow. Now a 95 win team seems like, something amazing, but you should always, you've got to like the Dodgers do and a lot of other teams, you build for these contingencies where Mookie Betts can get hurt and miss 4 months, right? Where, major pieces can get hurt, where minor pieces can get hurt and people can underperform. And yet you still, because you've got layers of depth and layers of quality, you can still make up for it. And that's the thing. We're paper thin, right? Like we are one Michael Bush injury away, right? From really suffering, because we just don't have, leaving. I talked about the pitchers a little bit, the young pitchers. the Cubs have now accumulated a ton of young position players at AAA. I think they're almost all at AAA at this point. We don't necessarily know what they're going to do at the major league level or where they're going to play or if they're going to play because we don't have a lot of spots for them. But what are we going to do about that? Like, how do you take that, whatever that talent or whatever that valuation is, and turn it into something, whether it's through trades or keeping the right guys and bringing them up. These are, I just feel like there's a lot, we're sort of in limbo here, in a lot of ways. And it'd be nice to have more answers, I guess.
I did want to mention the Ben Brown injury we talked about. Megan Montemurro tweeted, Ben Brown with a neck has been shut down from throwing. He's still not symptom-free and hadn't been making progress. There's no timeline currently for when he will resume, but...
He's been out for a couple months, right?
Yeah. Craig Counsell isn't calling it a season-ending situation. This podcast is. We're going to go ahead and declare it a season-ending situation. Brown just needs rest, no surgical intervention, which is good news, but bad news that Ben Brown, who we were pulling for, we wanted to find out, one of the answers we wanted was, could Ben Brown be a future closer for this team?
I mean, wouldn't that be perfect right now if he were healthy to just say, you know what, we're going to use him in late inning, high leverage situations for the rest of the year because we don't want to tax his arm too much as a starter, but we definitely need what he brings to the table. It'd be great if they could do that. And that's the frustration with the pitching injuries.
I mean, the Brown injury in particular, I am not trying to be an alarmist here. I really hope it's not that big of a deal. And a year from now, we're just watching Ben Brown throw a bunch of innings and everything looks great. It's a weird injury. It's a stress reaction in his neck that they originally thought was the start of a stress fracture or something. And then they were like, no, it's benign. It's fine. It's just going to heal itself in 2 or 3 months. Well, we're 2 months in and nothing is healing itself and he can't throw. And it's like, I am not anytime. I worry about 2 types of injuries. One is shoulders with pitchers, just because the structure of your shoulder is so different than like elbows. It seems like they've kind of figured it out a little bit. We know it's a Tommy John thing and they do it. And most of the time that works. Like shoulders, that doesn't seem to be the case. And the other is any injury you've never heard of. Anytime a pitcher has done something to himself that you're like, how did that happen? This is a injury I've never heard of. Something has gone wrong and it's with the dude's neck. And that seems problematic to me. I'm with you. I think it's a season-ending injury, and I'm not sure why the Cubs are trying to couch it as anything else. I also really wanted to see what...
That's what they do.
They'd be insane to bring him back the last week of the season.
Right,
with this,
why would you ever do that with this team? You're like, oh, maybe we can get to 81 wins instead of 80.
No, I agree with you 100%. And Jeremy and I have talked privately about that, but this injury seems fishy, from the beginning. Like you know what I like? I like broken bones. Those are the best. You know why? Because those heal. Like I know that. I can heal a broken bone. If I can do it, a professional athlete can. But this is weird. It's like he's got a neck. Well, you know what? I know a lot of pitchers with necks, but they don't miss like 6 months, 5 months out of the season. So no one's giving me a clear, like, to my satisfaction as a non-doctor, non-orthopedic specialist, what this injury really is, right? Like, because like you say, Sarah, I've never heard of this before. Like, why don't we see like one guy in every team with this then, and maybe we will. Maybe he's just the first. And you know how we have Tommy John surgery? Well, he'll have Ben Brown surgery where we'll get neck replacements. And this is just the first one. And we'll all laugh about this 20 years from now. But I do find that disconcerting. But again, it underscores the point you made that we've got this paper-thin team where we can't afford injuries or poor performance because we don't have enough people ready to come and replace them.
Well, and I want to go back to the other point y'all made about the farm system, because this is a piece I've been working on for a little while now, and it probably won't be out for a week or two just because it's got some big moving parts and I've got to still put some finishing touches on it. But I think people have mistaken a highly ranked farm system for a farm system that is going to come storm the team like 2015.
Yeah.
And these are not the same thing. And the farm system that the Cubs have right now that is highly ranked relative to other major league farm systems is a really good farm system, but it's a crew of guys, the best of whom is probably Pete Crow Armstrong, to give y'all like a barometer of like, this is the best guy who's coming, who are gonna be solid major league regulars someday. And part of the dilemma that the Cubs front office has right now is they have solid regular MLB players at both corner outfield positions and second base and third base right now who are probably better than the kids who are unproven in the minor leagues and would have to move for those kids in the minor leagues to get their shot. It's not like you can have James Triantos, Matt Shaw, and Nico Horner on the same team. You can't, and you probably wouldn't want that anyway.
If you can have Mastroboni and Madrigal and Bodie and Wisdom on the same team, I don't know why not.
Well, look, that was bad.
Again,
you
shouldn't.
That was just bad. But like Shaw and Triantos and Horner would probably be an upgrade over that. But like, you're not going to displace Dansby Swanson or Isak Paredes to do it. And this is the dilemma the Cubs find themselves in. They have a bunch of guys who probably could play Major League Baseball at the spots where they've already got somebody signed up for 2 or 3 years who is better than the guys they have in the minors. It's just a very weird farm system.
There is a phenomenon that I think all fans of teams that really follow their teams have, which is the hype, right? Like, oh, we've got these guys, like every guy that you just mentioned, all these guys in Alcantara, all the other guys, you know, at one point or another, I've been told, oh, these guys are going to be all-stars in the major league level. They're going to be great. And then it turns out, well, but he's only a corner outfielder. Maybe he's a DH and he's got swing and miss issues, or he doesn't hit for power, or, you know, there's always, as they mature. I mean, Jeremy, remember after that school fundraiser a couple of years ago, and 4 years ago, I was at a bar and some guy was telling me that the Cubs shouldn't go out and get one of the shortstops in that first shortstop class because, you know, Christian Hernandez is going to be great. I'm like, oh my God, he's like 15 years old. What are you talking about? And then you mentioned Ed Howard, and I'm like, oh, you know, like, yeah, you're right. We don't need Trey Turner. Why would we do that? We have children that we could fill in someday. And so when I think as Cubs fans in particular, we're spoiled to what Sarah said, with the 14, 15, 16, 17 classes, right? Up through basically Hap, right?
Yep.
From Rizzo to Hap. That was our, and everybody in between, you know, Baez and Bryant and Schwarber and all these guys. That was just an amazing Soler even. That was an amazing group of guys.
Contreras, who was not supposed to be there.
Yes.
Sorry, not to be that girl, but as the number one Wilson Contreras fan on the internet.
And Russell too, frankly.
You're in a safe space
right?
here. Yeah, we
you
love
know,
that.
like, yeah.
But like that's the quality the Cubs farm system was. The worst guy who was not supposed to make it, who was never supposed to be here, is a 3-time All-Star starting catcher.
Right. And when I think of that kind of group of guys, you know who it reminds me of? It's like, I would like the Baltimore Orioles farm system of the last 3 years. Thank you very much. Give me those guys. Like, those guys are studs. I don't care how many of them they have, but they got like 4 or 5 of them. They're really good. I'd rather have that than 25 like filler pieces. And one of the strengths of our system is that it's got a lot of filler pieces apparently, but filler is only supposed to help you like at the bottom of the lineup, or at the bottom of the roster, not get you over the top with star quality.
I'm glad you mentioned stars, because that's not
right. There's only 2 ways to get them. You grow them or you buy them, and we refuse to buy them, and we're not growing them.
No, and in that 2014 plus class that you just reeled off all those names, there's a bunch of stars in that lineup, and these guys you need to either develop or package them and move them out to get stars, and they just don't have them, and they haven't shown the ability to develop players beyond what their target or ceiling, you know, that they have. They're very conservative. They could be this person, and we will develop them to that person. And nobody, if they break through, it's not from anything the Cubs helped do or develop. That's what's really frustrating about the farm system.
I mean, PCA has some potential. Especially the last couple of weeks, watching him as the hit tool seems to mature a little bit. But he also has, in some ways, I think of him as the anti-Javi Baez. Because, you know, Javi had those preternatural instincts out there. He would like throw the ball to the quote unquote wrong base, but it was obviously the right base because Javi was seeing a way you could get 2 outs instead of 1 and like just doing stuff that was next level baseball on everybody. PGA looks like he wants to be playing next level baseball and then like accidentally misses catching the fly ball because of it, and I'm sure he'll get better, and the skills out there, don't get me wrong, like the arm is good, the range is good, the speed is incredible. He's hit like 3 triples now to left. Who hits a triple to left? What is that? Like, how does that keep happening? That's really cool. I love watching it. But he's not Javi Baez. Javi Baez had instincts that were like, oh, I bet I can deke this guy into letting us score a run while I like run between first and home and then like head back.
And then I'll get to second somehow on the play.
That's the Cubs don't have anybody like that. They don't have a Chris Bryant who can set the rookie home run record. They don't have a Wilson Contreras who can outgrit his way to multiple All-Star game appearances. They don't have an Anthony Rizzo who's a captain. They don't have a Kyle Schwarber who's going to hit 40 plus home runs multiple times for some other team.
Or Jorge Soler who's going to do it for some other team multiple times.
Leading off for the Braves, who we mentioned earlier. They don't have a Jake Arrieta sitting in the wings who's going to win a Cy Young Award. They have some really good number 2 to 3 pitchers and a bunch of guys who all might be mid-level major leaguers who could maybe be the lone all-star for their team someday when their team is really bad.
So when you look at that, and to Pete Armstrong and the Javi comparison, there are ways in which I think Javi is superior to Pete. I think so far Pete's strike zone
Agree.
analysis is better. I don't mind the fact that Pete Armstrong makes some over aggressive mistakes on the bases as a rookie, and like that pop up that he and Horner kind of had the miscommunication on. I can live with that because I think that will smooth out. I think you're right. I think he's got such great gifts that stuff will take care of it. It's not like it's Moises Alou making the same boneheaded base running mistake or outfield mistake over and over and over again at age 34, right? Like this guy's a child.
We agree.
He's out there and the great part is if he does get on base, it's like he's like an automatic stolen base of second, right? Like he's like 23 for 23 or something. That's
perfect
fantastic.
down the years.
Yeah, he's incredible. And I this is no shade to PCA, who is one of my favorite Cubs right now.
Yeah.
It's more a notice to people that's the ceiling of the farm.
Right.
That's the best player in the Cubs farm system that Cubs fans are going to see for the next 3 years.
And he's not a power hitter, and he does look overmatched at the plate sometimes. So I mean, he still has a long way to go, and he's the best. He's not like Adley Rutschman or Henderson or somebody like the Orioles have, who's just going to trot out there and hit 320 and be an all-star, right? Like from Jump Street, like Chris Bryant was. Those are few and far between, and so the Cubs are going to have to figure out how to make do with a bunch of sort of complementary potential pieces, I think, and hopefully some of them will actually develop a little bit better than the ceiling, Jeremy, like we've always been hoping for, but haven't had in a long time. And in the meantime, they're gonna struggle to be a playoff contender unless they're willing to go out and actually get a star, I think, to make up for that.
Well, and that's the ticket. Like you have to go out and get a star. And I actually think the Cubs have painted themselves into a little bit of a corner here on the go out and get a star market because, and credit to Britt Droley on this one. She talks about it on occasion on Rates and Barrels, and I think this is absolutely spot on accurate. She used to talk about the Eric Hosmer contract as not the Padres making a wise decision to sign Eric Hosmer, but the Padres showing that they were going to spend money, which made it possible for them to then trade for and extend Manny Machado. And it made it possible for them to go credibly get some of these other guys and get them to sign deals there that they would not have signed otherwise, because you have to have the single big free agent signing first to attract the other guys so that they know they're not going to be abandoned by this.
The John Lester, you mean?
Yeah. The John Lester and the Jason
Cubs
Hayward.
didn't get Dice K, right? Because or was it Matsui? Who was it that they went for the year before the Yankees got him instead? Because he's like,
Matsui was a Yankee, so I don't know if that's who you're thinking of.
It might be, but it was one of those situations where the Cubs had no credibility until they got Lester.
But like, you get Lester, then you can get Hayward, then you can like start to coalesce some dudes.
And Zobrist will agree to come and stuff like that.
Did that work and got those contracts here. And Hoyer let it vanish, which means until he signs a deal that is going to like show the world that the Cubs are back and in again, which he has not done yet. The Dansby deal is not that. The Dansby deal is the Hayward deal at shortstop. The Bellinger deal is literally the opposite of this. It is we're going to like have all these weird opt-outs and things so that we don't have to, so we can avoid paying you what we think you're worth long-term. Like we're not going to invest long-term. If you're Juan Soto, you're not even considering the Cubs. There's no chance that you're going to consider the Cubs. You might like have a conversation, but
you don't think $12.5 million a year is going to do it for Soto?
Spend $400 million, $500 million on Juan Soto. There is no way. And if he got that offer from the Cubs, he'll get a match from the Yankees and he's gone. And so the Cubs have squandered their position as big market franchise who will do the big deal, which means the option is develop a star. And you know who had the best star potential in the Cubs system? Christopher Morel. Lower in his strikeout rate, raising his walk rate, 35 plus home run potential. Yeah, it's been ugly this year. Best star potential in the Cubs system. They were like, yeah, we're going to trade him for Isaac Paredes. You played yourself. You have no stars. You don't know how to develop them and you won't pay for them.
So no, I do look forward. I was just going to say I do look forward to the off season when Jed tells us that the Cubs were in. They were in on Juan Soto, but we're just outbid towards the end. They just couldn't.
So while we desperately need an offensive star, right? We agree. The one, when you talk about the credibility and getting somebody, the one sort of possible sort of shining light I see out there, although you have to squint to see it, is what if the Cubs could get Corbin Burns, who pitched with Craig Counsell, right, in Milwaukee, came up with him. Is there any way they could convince him? Now, I know that's like, well, what do we need a starting pitcher for? Well, we're going to need a starting pitcher, trust me. Kyle's gone. That's $14.5 million you can throw in right off the bat on somebody like Corbin, who's 29, I guess. Also, you know, the Taillon regression has begun, and the Cubs could really use. They need to be. If your lineup's not going to be better than other teams, you've got to be better at something, right? Like, and if you have an actual ace starter, and imagine if Steele and Imanaga were like the second and third pitchers, then all of a sudden in any 3-game matchup, you match up favorably or better than almost every other team. You know, like where's your advantage, right? Because it's not going to be in the lineup. They're not going to get like Mike Piazza in his prime to catch for them. They're not going to get, you know what I mean? Like they're limited in what they can do lineup wise to actually be better than someone else.
I'm going to come to the Corbin Burns part of this in 1 second because I do want to talk about that. But can we just talk about the fact that the Cubs ceded a massive hitting advantage at catcher, and we're not supposed to. We are all not supposed to notice this. Like they went from a dude who hits like JD Martinez at catcher who caught every day to what we have now, and they were just like, no, we'll make it up somewhere, and they did not.
No,
so
we got a second round supplemental draft pick. So I don't know.
Congratulations, I'm fine if the Cubs want to go after Corbin Burns. I don't think they can. I don't think he'd sign here. I don't think they have $30 million. He's going to want Garrett Cole money, and he's not going to get it from the Cubs. So he's going to get it from somebody else. Frankly, he might get it from the Orioles. They have a new owner, and their new owner appears interested in trading for good players and spending money and bringing a championship to Baltimore. And good for Baltimore. They're certainly high on my list of teams that I will consider cheering for if the Cubs and Red Sox are out of it.
So I do want to talk a little bit about the week that was before we get into previewing this week's games for the Cubs. We talked at the top that the Cubs Twitter was buzzing. I was getting texts from people saying, are the Cubs back in it? And it was because they took 3 of 4 from the Cardinals, and then they went on to take 2 of 3 from Minnesota. And having that 5-2 homestand, you get to play the worst team then in baseball, historically bad Chicago White Sox. And Pat, we have to say when we're wrong here on the podcast, we always own up to it, and we were wrong. I was concerned for that Friday game, seeing the Cubs against Garrett Crochet, and I figured that was going to be the game that the Cubs were going to lose. But
which is
no.
a fair assumption. I mean, look, I thought the Cubs would split the two games. They'd go 3-1 against the White Sox for the season, which, for the White Sox would be a 250 winning percentage, which would make them, in fact, equal to the worst team in the history of baseball if they did that all year, which they have done.
Sure.
So it was in keeping with their badness
The
that I
theme.
thought that would happen, right? Turns out they're worse than that. So there you go. Who knew? Yeah, no, this week when the Cubs were able to go 4-1, a lot of things, and the Cubs were due for a week like this, frankly, because they've had a lot of weeks where things have gone poorly, where we've inexplicably lost games we should have won. This is a week where, we split the first two games with the Twins. I really thought the Cubs would lose the Wednesday day game, the getaway day.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Ryan's a real tough pitcher, and Assad was struggling early, and I'm like, oh well, this doesn't look good to me. And then Ryan just throws his arm out, and there you go. The bullpen comes in, and we crush them, right? That's the kind of break that we haven't been getting lately. And then with that White Sox series, same thing. I mean, getting that 7-0 lead and then blowing it pretty much almost completely, and then loading the bases. And it's just, by the way, just as an aside, so Grady Sizemore, first game as the manager of the White Sox in the 9th inning, with Neris on the mound, heart attack Hector, as you call it. I like that. First and second, nobody out. Was it Lopez at the plate? He's a pretty good bunter, right? I was shocked that they didn't bunt the runners over to second and third with one out, because then the next two balls were both fly out. The next one was a deep fly out to Suzuki, and I don't know. Like, it seemed to me that was a miss there. I don't know if that's a manager thing or if that's a strategy. I know people don't like to bunt much, but sometimes there are opportunities where it makes sense. I imagine
that team
Cubs would have. So Neris would have then walked someone with first base open inexplicably,
100%.
right? And then you would have had one out and the bases loaded, and then a hit batter or sac fly. I just couldn't imagine the Cubs getting out of that unscathed. But the White Sox just hit a bunch of flyouts and ended the game, which was satisfying. But that seemed odd to me. I don't know, as a manager, or I don't know, as a tactician.
No, I agree with you. I think that was a poor play. I don't know, man. I can't get too jazzed about beating this White Sox team. It's a very, very bad baseball team. Like, an unbelievably bad baseball team to watch. They just lost 21 games in a row. Am I right about that? 22,
Yeah.
21. 21 games in a row, and I think they've won one game since that start. They've started a new losing streak. So the Whites, I also think they have lost 20 games in a row or something crazy earlier this season. It is an unbelievably snake-bitten team.
So they lost 14 games in a row, 21 games in a row, and in addition to that, they started off the season 3-22. And if none of those things had happened, they'd still be under 500.
This is what I'm talking about. This is like the White Sox are. So a friend of mine a friend from Boston came into town. He wanted to see the Red Sox play the White Sox, and sure, it's a great ticket to get, right? And so a friend of mine gave me his tickets, and we went to that game. And the Red Sox were down 2 in the top of the 9th, and we were pretty sure the Red Sox were going to lose. But the Red Sox came back, and then the White Sox are the White Sox, so the White Sox lost in extras. And when they were in the middle of that 21 game losing streak, I was like, "Hey, we might have seen the worst team of all time," and he's just like, yay, like, what? I guess that's fun. The White Sox, I can't take anything from that. The Twins series win was good. That's a solid team that you should be able to beat at home. The Cardinals series, though, and I know this goes a little bit farther back than a week, so I apologize for taking some liberties here, but the loss the Cubs had in that Cardinals series is
brutal.
Exactly the type of loss that they cannot have.
Agreed.
This is the reason that I think this team is not going to the playoffs, because you can't they have multiple losses like that loss, and you can't do that. You can't have the game in hand and then have multiple errors and lose 5-4 against your rival and think that you're going to the playoffs.
And how can anybody, in all honesty, with a straight face, think the Cubs are going to go to the playoffs if you're going to ride or die with Hector Neris? I mean, there's got to be, unless they're going to make a change to Miller, so unless they're going to do something outside the box here, this just seems like it's like you're careening towards a cliff, and you're gonna eventually your brakes don't work. You're gonna go over it, right? I mean, seriously.
Well, and two things about Hector Neris. One, I'm not the person who came up with Heart Attack Hector. That is what the Cubs bullpen calls him. That is what the team refers to him as.
Wisniewski said it on interview on The Score was the first time we heard it.
So let me ask you a real quick question. If your closer has the worst whip on your entire roster, is that good or bad?
It's hard. It's a recipe for a heart attack is what I'm trying to say. And at least he's self-aware. The second thing about this, though, I just am not. There is the one reliever I might trust right now is Merriweather. I'm not sure who else is out there. You traded a guy who can throw 100 miles per hour in Hunter Biggie. He's gone. Porter Hodge kind of gets things done on occasion. Mark Leiter is gone. This bullpen is unserious. Drew Smiley is not going to throw meaningful innings for you to get you to a playoff. Like, come on.
What about Tyson Miller?
He should be like your 6th or 7th inning guy.
Right. That's exactly the right spot. Yeah.
But since we don't have a closer, I'm just saying, I don't know. You really are kind of grasping at straws a little bit here.
The bullpen is it's a pretty dire situation,
and this is where the injuries are killing you too. By the way, all the young pitchers who could be relievers and so
pitchers who could be starters who would then push guys into the bullpen.
Like Assad could be in the bullpen. Yeah.
I would keep Assad in the starting role just because he's been better there over his career. But I think, like if you had a Jordan Wicks throwing 3 innings out of the bullpen, or you had like a Ben Brown in the back end of your bullpen, that could be kind of interesting. It's just they don't have any
anybody, but they're all hurt.
And I'm not entirely sure that this team can. They're going to have to win a substantial number of games down the stretch that are exactly like that Cubs-Cardinals loss that they squandered. Exactly like the game tonight. Tonight's game against the Guardians was a winnable game. You have to be able to win that game if you're a serious playoff contender. You have the lead twice. You can't hold it. You have kind of one error, some plays that are questionably errors, but maybe just misplays.
So the Cubs play a number of games. Their strength of schedules is not as strong as other teams going down the stretch. They play a number of games against like the A's and the Marlins and the Rockies and teams like that. Does that give you any optimism?
They have the easiest schedule.
There you go.
These teams going down the rest of the way. It's the 2 more against Cleveland, and then 3 at home against the Blue Jays. You've got the Tigers at home, at the Marlins, at the Pirates, at the Nationals.
Right, the Nats.
And then you get into September where it gets a little tougher after you play the Pirates again. You have the Yankees, the Dodgers, and then you get a break with the Rockies, A's, Nationals before you play a Phillies team who may or may not be playing. They may just be coasting on into the playoffs. And then you close out with Cincinnati. So it's a lighter schedule. There's just a couple teams in there, but
I'm not convinced that the Cubs are necessarily the kind of team that's going to lose to the good teams and beat up on the bad teams. So
nope.
I feel like they're going to just play 2 out of 3. We'll win 2 out of 3.
Like a 500 team would do.
Everybody, like they'll go to Colorado, but do you think they're going to sweep the Rockies in Colorado? Nah, probably not. Maybe they win 2 out of 3 and then lose 2 out of 3 to the Phillies. I don't know. It's something like that, right? Like,
I think they might stun us and do something funky, like take 2 out of 3 out from the Phillies or 2 out of 3 from the Yankees or something, and we're all like, "Oh my God, this is great!" Kind of like when they swept the Orioles, and we were all like, "Whoa, this team might win," and then they're going to do something ridiculous, like lose 2 of 3 to the Tigers. And we're all going to be like, how did that happen? And it's going to be because Javi Baez did something ridiculous at Wrigley Field. And we all just had to sit there and watch it. Yep. And I have this theory about Javier Baez that I'm just going to put on the record right now because I have a chance to. And y'all hold me accountable to it. But I think that man is a showman and he needs a crowd and he needs the fans sort of like bumping him up to do the thing. And he's better when he has either proponents are enemies. Like fans are enemies. Like he's better, right? That's why he's great when he plays the White Sox. I have a hunch Javier Baez is going to come into Wrigley and do ridiculous things, just absurd, ridiculous things. We're all going to be like, oh my God, how did the Cubs ever let this guy go? And the Tigers fans are going to be like, who is this guy? This is not the player that we've seen for the last 3 years at all. But I just have this hunch that Javi's going to do Javi things at Wrigley.
Well, let's get into our predictions for the week that will be here. Again, 2 more remaining at Cleveland, 3 against the Blue Jays. The matchups against Cleveland, Assad and Boyd tomorrow. And then Wednesday is Tyone against Cobb. And then you've got your 3 against the Blue Jays. So of the 5 games, we'll go 5 games.
I'll count all 6.
Okay, we'll count all 6. Right, we've got. All right, we're starting with the 1 loss. We'll start with Sarah.
Yeah.
Of the 6 upcoming games, including today, how do you see the Cubs' record for the week, Sarah?
It's a great question. I think we're looking at a 3-3 record. I think they'll take 2 of 3 from the Blue Jays. I think they're going to lose 1 more against the Guardians. They'll take 1 out of that series. You know, weird fact about Cleveland, I was thinking about it tonight as Shoto's kind of getting teed off on by some dudes who are not exactly known for hitting home runs in Cleveland. Cleveland has played like a hitter's park this season. It's some weird, and I've heard people who are much smarter than me talk about this. It's something to do with like signage that they took down and like wind tunnels and stuff. But the Cleveland Park is playing more offensively than it has in years past. And I think we saw a bit of that tonight with that 8-9 score. I think we're going to see a little bit more of it. And I'm not sure how that's going to play for Javier Assad in particular. I think that could be kind of problematic for Javier Assad. I think this Blue Jays team is honestly pretty disappointing. I mean, I love the Cubs. I like this Blue Jays team. It could be worse, Cubs fans. You could be in the heart of your 2016 window and be watching your team just fall apart at the seams without having won anything. And that's sort of where the Blue Jays are at right now. So I think that the Cubs will probably get their mojo back at Wrigley over the weekend, but I do think they're going to drop 2 of 3 in Cleveland.
Pat, 3-3, or do you think they are going to do better?
So the Guardians are an interesting team because they've got 2 pretty good starters and 3 terrible starters. The Cubs get to face all 3 terrible starters. So that's good news, right? I actually am, I can't say I'm bullish on Toronto because obviously they're not very good, but not very good in the sense that they're going to be like, after tonight, they'll probably be like 9 games under 500, 7 games under 500 just in their own division, though, because that's a brutal division to play in, by the way. I mean, they look at all the other teams they have to play. That's, you know, if they were in they were in the AL West, I think they might be closer to 500 now. So, you know, I'm a little bit, I have a little more respect for Toronto's abilities than most would, or than their record might indicate. But when you add it all together, I do think 3-3 makes sense. I think they'll lose the first game for sure, and then from there,
good call.
You know, I think they will win. If I had to guess, I'd say they'll lose 2 out of 3 to Cleveland. I would have said this before tonight. Lose 2 out of 3 to Cleveland, beat Toronto 2 out of 3, but I could see it going the other way too. And Guerrero's, you know, been red hot lately. I could see him teeing off on the Cubs, and Kyle Hendricks on Saturday when I'm there at the game. So yeah, I think, but you know, if they go 3-3 this week, it's not the end all be all. I think actually it's not a bad week for them, given who they're playing and given who they have coming up, which are the easier games. The Detroit Miami next week is the real killer, because those 6 games you've got to actually, you know, make up ground on those. You can't squander that week, or you're just running out of time. But yeah, 3-3 in the state of things in the wild card race, I think will keep them afloat.
Yeah, of all the teams I named for the remainder of the schedule, 0 of them are ahead of the Cubs in their wild card chase currently. So you not only have to win your games, but also hope for some help along the way that those teams in front of you don't remain hot or get hotter than they currently are. So we will keep an eye on the playoff push for the Cubs, maybe. But a team that definitely had a playoff push at this time, 40 years ago, was your 1984 Chicago Cubs. And here every week on the podcast, we're celebrating those 1984 Chicago Cubs by parachuting into this week in 1984 and seeing what was up with the 1984 Cubs on their way to the playoffs. Pat, what happened this week in 1984?
Well, I'll try to be succinct if I can. This was a great week for the Cubs. Last week was a great week for the Cubs, and this week. And these were the 2 weeks that kind of put them, they were 4.5 under behind the Mets, and then they were up half a game last week. Like they made that big switch because they won 3 out of 4 against the Mets. This week, the Cubs played Montreal for 4 and the Mets for 4 because they had, remember all those rainouts in April? Well, they're playing a lot of doubleheaders this week. So the Cubs played 8 games in 7 days. This is before the Players Association was really pushing for those things. And they weren't doing day-night doubleheaders. They're like, we start 30 minutes after the first game ends. So, it's a cheap ticket. Cubs were at home. They started the week half a game in first place. They ended the week 4.5 games ahead of the Mets. So it was a big week. And that was done in large part because the Cubs swept the Mets in the 4 games. Sutcliffe had 2 wins this week. They beat Gooden. They crushed Ron Darling. They beat future Cub general manager Ed Lynch and Walt Terrell. In fact, the Ed Lynch game was funny because apparently during this series there was a beanball war back and forth, and at one point after hitting a home run, I think Keith Moreland got thrown at by Ed Lynch. I can't imagine Ed Lynch like throwing at somebody because I think of him more as a older general manager. And then Moreland, who was famously like a linebacker at the University of Texas or something, charged the mound and decided to like tackle him, like literally like you would tackle someone if you were a linebacker. So that was fun. And then, it was a bench clearing brawl or whatever. After the game, Moreland said, "I'm sure Eddie Lynch was doing what he thought proper at the time. If he'd been throwing at my head, that would have been a different story. He would have been messing with my life. So I have no hard feelings towards anybody, blah, blah, blah. And, but I did go out there and try to kick his ass." So, that was, it's baseball in the 80s, right? Like that happened all the time. And it was ejected, of course. They just continued playing baseball like after a physical confrontation. But yeah, it was a great week for the Cubs. Even in the one loss to Montreal that Dennis Eckersley threw, I'll read you his line. Now the Cubs lost in 10 innings, 1-0, but Eckersley went 9 innings, gave up 0 runs, 4 hits, 2 walks, 2 strikeouts. Can you imagine in today's baseball if a starting pitcher went 9 shutout innings and only struck out 2 batters? But it was more of a play to contact era, I guess, back then. So people swung and they missed or they hit a lot of balls in play. So it was a great week for the Cubs. This kind of cemented. We look back at the 84 season and people will refer to the Sandberg game against the Cardinals in June and say, that's when we knew that the Cubs were going to win. That's bullshit. That's garbage. No, it wasn't. It was just a great game on a Saturday on national TV and we're all super excited. And that might have been the time when people started to figure out who Ryan Sandberg was. But what really, I think, convinced people the Cubs were for real was these 2 weeks when they beat the Mets 7 out of 8 games and took a commanding lead of first place. Because the Cubs hadn't been in first place in August in like 11 years, right? So this was like a big deal, for the Cubs. And so being 4.5 up in cruise control here in the middle of August, all was good on the north side of Chicago.
Sarah, any memories for you of the 84 team?
I mean, not specific to this week. I was very, very little in 1984, so my lone sterling memory is probably of the Sandberg game, but no shade there. I've obviously fallen in love with this team and studied it and read about it for years since. But the one thing I really remember is watching Ryan Sandberg hit all those home runs and looking at my dad and being like, "Who's that? That's my favorite team." Like that was it. That was very little. But the thing I will say about Cubs teams who have been good over the years is they do have those moments. They have them early where you're like, I believe in this team. And last year's team had those moments. The Tachman catch in St. Louis coming down the trade deadline.
We're watching that together during that storm.
The Hap assist at the plate to get the Brewers late and like end the game.
How about the Morel home run against the White Sox?
Home run against the White Sox. Like those were moments where you're like, we believe, and we're here and we believe.
Yep. And
that team finished one game short. And I am still waiting for this team to establish those moments. I've been at a handful of walk-offs. I was at Morel's walk-off earlier this year. I was at Bush's walk-off. I've seen some interesting things. Shota's been great.
Yes.
My favorite thing that happened this week in baseball was the Shota fans at the Cleveland game tonight on Monday night. There were like these ladies sitting in the bleachers. I'm literally going to write this up. They were sitting behind the nets, and you could like see them, and they had these little heart-shaped fans with Shota on them. And Shota fans for Shota fans is fun stuff, and I love that.
Yes.
And that's the type of thing that's great about baseball, but that does not get you to the playoffs. You got to have those signature wins, and I don't know where they are for this team.
Do you count not blowing a 7-0 lead against the worst team in the history of baseball as one of those?
I do not. I do not.
Just checking. Because that's like, yeah, we haven't had the ones where the Cubs, not too many, where the Cubs have had that kind of that comeback. Cardinals they won one of the Cardinals games, I guess, when they came back in the ninth, and probably, but boy, few and far between.
No, not the moments.
I think my favorite moment this year was Justin Steele's complete game, and that was very fun to be there for. When they played his walkout music for the ninth inning, and he came out and was pitching to "God's Gonna Cut You Down," I was just like, oh, Justin Steele is gonna there's no way this isn't happening. That's probably my favorite thing that happened at Wrigley Field this year. But I would love them to string together some of those moments in August and September and make me believe again. And I will be the loudest Cubs fan you've ever heard if they're playing in October, playing meaningful baseball in October. But just don't see it right now.
The Michael Busch 3 home run game when the Cubs won 11-10 this coming Saturday against Toronto is going to be one of my memories.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I'll probably be at Saturday's game, so we should definitely find a way to say hi.
Yes.
Excellent. Sara Sanchez, always a pleasure catching up and talking Cubs with you. Please remind all of our listeners where they can find all of your work on the internet.
You can follow me on the socials at BCB_Sara, except on Blue Sky, where there are no underscores. So it's just at BCB just at BCB Sara. My writing is at bleedcubbyblue.com. I am occasionally on podcasts over there as well on the Bleacher Bunch Network. And then if you're a fantasy baseball type, check out my work at Baseball HQ and Pitcher List.
And you can follow us on all the social media platforms at Wrigleyville Nat, Facebook.com/Wrigleyville Nation, and of course the YouTube channel. That's where the video version of this podcast is. This is where we need your help to go. We're trying to build up the viewers and the subscribers over on YouTube this season. So please, even if you consume via audio only, that is totally fine. Go over to youtube.com, search for Wrigleyville Nation Podcast, and give us a subscribe. It helps us work the algorithm so other Cub fans can find the show. And continue to stay subscribed, as we will be back every single week in all audio and video pod-catching forms. So with that, we're going to wrap it up and call it a podcast for the week. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening. And we'll talk to you again next time.